Helldivers 2 already includes over 20 different enemy types, many of them requiring wildly different strategies to defeat. For example, did you know the difference between a nursing spewer and a bile spewer? How about the weak spot on a charger? And spoiler alert, it isn't on its arse. In this video, I will share these secrets with you and many more as we go through all enemies in the game, both Terminids and Automatons, and we discuss their behavioral patterns, their weaknesses, and most importantly, the most effective ways to deal with them all. As we're starting off with the Terminids, there are 12 different variations of Terminids, though for some reason IGN have only listed 8. So now let's progress down from easiest to hardest, and I'll talk you through them all, what you can expect and what to do when you encounter them. Obviously, I don't want to bore you and drag this video out, so we won't really dwell on the easy ones. Let me just skim past them nice and quickly so we can get to how to tackle the tougher Terminids later on in the list. Firstly, the very basic Terminid is the Scavenger. They're tiny little bugs that crawl up to you at surprising speed and nibble at your ankles. If you let them get near you, they are fairly damaging. A good 5 or 6 bites will kill you, and considering they're the weakest enemy in the game and they can come at you in swarms, don't underestimate them. However, they all die from pretty much one shot from any weapon. So my advice with Scavengers is just try and be spatially aware and don't get yourself caught out and swarmed by them, and you'll be absolutely fine. The next easiest enemy is the Bile Spitter. These look very similar to Scavengers, and they are tiny little baby Bile Spewers. They are even slower than Scavengers, just as weak. The only thing that makes them dangerous is they now have a short-ranged attack. Again, tackle them the exact same way as Scavengers. Use a weak weapon so that you're not wasting your big powerful weapons. Just one-shot them and mind where they are. Next up, the most rank and file of the medium-sized bugs is the Warrior. The Warrior is most similar in shape to the Brood Commander, and they are effectively a baby Brood Commander without any kind of armor. Arguably as easy to beat as the Scavengers. One direct shotgun blast or 5 or 6 bullets from any assault rifle is going to melt these guys. Just be careful, because if you do opt to shoot their head off, they can survive for a few seconds without the head and continue hacking at you. Now that all the normal, boring, easy bugs are out the way, we'll move on to the slightly more powerful ones. Next up, you have got the Nursing Spewer. These things are like the weaker, younger brother of the Bile Spewer. They have exactly the same amount of health, however their attacks don't last as long, they deal slightly less damage, and they also have less tracking than the Bile Spewers, so they are slightly easier to avoid. As with the Warriors, their weak spot may not be as obvious as it first seems. As I mentioned with the Warriors, you want to actually focus on the legs. With Nursing Spewers, you want to focus on the head. Though you can blow up the giant egg sac at the back, the head is weaker, and unlike the Warrior, once you blow up the head, they will stop in their tracks and die immediately. The only thing you need to watch out for is their ranged bile attack, and you will see they lift their head to one side or the other when they're about to do this attack, so just dive in the opposite direction and you should avoid it 99.9% of the time. Other than that, blast their head and they'll go down in no time at all. Next up, we've got the Brood Commander. Bosses in lower level difficulties, regular enemies in higher difficulties. You can treat these things the exact same way as Warriors. Just be careful, they are far faster, far more powerful, and they take a lot more bullets to take down. Again, primarily focus on the legs. These things can survive for ages without a head. Focus the legs, and they will go down far quicker than anticipated. They have a very minimal amount of armor compared to the next bug that we're going to cover, so you can use pretty much any weapon you want to take these guys down. Next up is another bug that seems to miss people's lists, and that is the Hive Guard. As the name suggests, these guys will primarily spawn when you start attacking any nests, and despite the fact that they are lower down in the hierarchy than the Brood Commander, the Hive Guard are far more powerful for one big reason. They have a huge amount of armor on both their head and their front 2 legs. And when they start being attacked, they will hunker down and completely resist most forms of damage. If you have something quite armor piercing, such as the expendable anti-tank, the recoilless rifle, or the railgun, these will absolutely melt them, most likely in one shot. However, if you need to fight them any other way, then you want to get up close and personal and aim for the neck. You will almost always be able to breach the armor in between the head and the leg, and shooting them, for example, with a shotgun shell up close will stun them enough that it will break them out of this defensive stance, and you can then just stun lock them to death by repeatedly shooting the same spot. Before we continue on to the next enemy, just a quick public service announcement that friendly fire is also enabled for your enemies. Here is a Bile Spitter practically one-shotting a Hive Guard for me. Now we come to the top 5 actually genuinely difficult Terminids to fight. The next Terminid we'll look at is probably my most hated, especially when they gang up on you in packs. That is of course the Hunter. You can also encounter lighter coloured baby hunters. They can leap much bigger distances. These ones are actually a different bug variant called the Pouncer, and though they may seem equally as intimidating at first, like the Scavengers, they do not really pose any threat. They are very, very weak and will most likely die in one hit from pretty much all damage sources. I'm talking about the fully grown adult hunters with more of an orange hue. I'd say the one thing that makes these the scariest is that they will telegraph your attacks, and if you are aiming your gun in their direction, if possible, they will automatically jump out of the way. It's a very clever feature of the AI, and it makes them super scary, especially if there is a swarm of them and you're playing on solo. The Hunter is really the only Terminid I do not have any proper solid advice for, other than use quick firing weapons with a higher chance to hit them. These are definitely some of the tougher bugs to deal with, but one great little tip if you do keep missing them and they do manage to get up close, don't forget you have a melee feature. If they get right up in your face, you can melee them, which will stun them for a brief second, open some distance, and allow you to bring your primary weapon back out and shoot them in the face before they have a chance to jump away again. The melee attack is very underused, probably because it's so weak and inefficient in most scenarios, but against hunters it's actually a really good tool when most other tools just won't cut it. Now we're talking about the big brother of the hunter, one of the scariest Terminids to face, the Stalker. This will only show up in certain missions. It's twice as fast as the Hunter, 3 times more powerful, and the damn thing can go invisible. It's also the only Terminid that can outrun you even at a sprinting speed, so there is no option to run away from a Stalker. If you see a Stalker, you have to deal with it, that's your only option. You can even outrun a Bile Titan, admittedly only when you're sprinting, but even the Stalker will catch you when you're sprinting. Using things like spores and smoke grenades will help you see them easier when they are cloaked, but even without that, they're not tremendously hard to spot when they're cloaked. That's not the real issue. The real issue is their speed and their power. Feel free to waste any big powerful weapons you have dealing with the Stalker as quickly as possible, whether it be a railgun or a machine gun. Do whatever you can to kill this thing as quickly as possible. But my biggest tip and the most important advice when facing Stalkers is always run in the direction it just attacked you. Stalkers will only spawn when there is a Stalker lair somewhere on the map. And each time another one pops up, follow where it came from until you track down that lair and you can blow it up. And please be warned, on higher difficulty missions, you can encounter multiple Stalker lairs. So if you've already blown it up and you're still being attacked by them, there's another one. Rinse and repeat the exact same process. Make this your primary objective until all Stalkers and Stalker lairs have been defeated. There is just one more Terminid to cover before we get onto the big two, and that is the Bile Spewer. You pretty much already know exactly how to deal with the Bile Spewer, having listened to my tips for the Nursing Spewer. This is just the bigger, fully grown version of the Nursing Spewer. It has the exact same amount of health, though it does slightly more damage, and its attacks can be a bit more annoying, because the Bile Spew itself can reach a wider cone. It also lasts longer and deals more damage, but the strats for taking it down remain the exact same. Aim for the head, dive to the side. That's the main thing you need to know about Bile Spewers. Ideally, kill them from range. My favourite way to deal with Bile Spewers, especially if they're in groups, is get out the grenade launcher. it will two-shot Bile Spewers no matter where you hit them. So if you have 3 Bile Spewers all clumped up, try and aim for the middle one, and 2 or 3 grenade shots with splash damage should take out all 3 of them. Even though individually these are some of the least scary enemies, if you let them get too close when dealing with a swarm and you miss the Bile Spew, it can sow chaos even amongst a team of 4. So always keep an eye out for them and try and deal with them at range if you can, because this way they remain very weak and harmless. And now we're on to the big two. Let's finally talk about the Charger. Where is its weak spot, Dom? It's clearly the rear. That's the only place it isn't armored. Well, even though all of your shots will deal normal damage to the back of the Charger because it isn't armored, it isn't classed as a weak spot. What you need to do is shoot the armor off either of its front 2 legs, and you will see a very different colored, soft flesh underneath. Your attacks will now deal an insane amount of bonus damage when shooting these legs. So what I like to do is either 1 recoilless rifle shot or 2 railgun shots will completely strip the armor from one of its legs. Then all you need is 15 to 20 rounds of any assault rifle or 4 to 5 shotgun shells. That Charger has been completely destroyed. It's as simple as that. It takes such an insane amount of damage once you have stripped the armor off its legs. And an even better bonus on top of this, when using this tactic, you don't have to wait and try and get behind the Charger, dealing tiny little bits of chip damage each time it turns around. As it's charging at you, you can get a few shots in, roll out the way, wait for it to face you again, and repeat. Once you get good at it, you will be killing charges in 2 to 3 charges maximum. And now, finally, for the Bile Titan. Yeah, just use the Rail Cannon Orbital Strike or the 500 kg bomb. Thanks, bye! For real though, these things are practically invincible to all forms of damage. They do have 2 giant sacks underneath them that you can blow up, and it will deal a significant amount of damage to them each time you blow up one of these sacks. But unlike the Charger, it doesn't reveal any kind of weak spot. They are still going to be immune to all but the highest of armor-piercing damage. So you can blow up these sacks to weaken them, but you're still going to need something like the Rail Cannon or just the Rail Gun to be able to finish them off. The Autocannon Sentry is alright, it won't be able to defeat them by itself, but if you back it up with some of your own weapons, you and an autocannon should be able to take one down. If you can, just always have a member of your team with a well-aimed 500 kg bomb, or ideally the orbital rail cannon, and that should deal with them in no time at all. Now that the Terminids are done, let's move on to my favourite of the 2 factions, the Automatons. There are actually 18 different variations of the Automatons, but I've broken them down into 11 different categories because some of them are quite similar. There are no less than 7 different types of what I would call little guys. The first 3 variations are the basic Raider, the MG Raider, and the Rocket Raider. And as you've probably already guessed, the MG Raider carries a machine gun and the Rocket Raider carries a rocket launcher. Just like the Scavengers of the Terminids, all of these will pretty much go down in 1 or 2 shots of any weapon. However, they are not to be trifled with, especially the Rocket Raiders, because they can pack a punch and even one-shot you. So it is very much advised to use cover at all times where possible when fighting the bots. And if you can, even bring a personal or a full-size shield generator for the whole team, because in many situations you will be bombarded with bullets and rockets from all over the place almost constantly. Now that we've covered the first 3 types of Raider, the 4th and final type is the Assault Raider. And the reason I've called out this variation specifically is because they have one very big strength that the other 3 don't have that you need to look out for, and this is their jump pack. Not only will their jump pack allow them to close distances very quickly, it also can and will explode when they die, and it will one-shot you if you're stood right next to them. So be very careful of Assault Raiders. Always try to dive away before delivering that finishing blow because they can be very scary. The next 2 little guys are the Mauraders and the Troopers. Marauders are just as weak as Raiders, and they don't really do all that much more either. Never underestimate any of the bots. But as long as you have a gun in your hand and you shoot first, the Marauders also won't pose any more of a threat to you than the Raiders. As for the Troopers, you rarely ever see these guys on foot. You occasionally will. I don't have any footage of them because it is that rare. Usually you find them operating Scout Striders, which we will talk about in just a second. The seventh and final little guy is the Brawler. Brawlers melt just as quickly as all the other little guys, but they can run at you with their dual swords and deal quite a bit of damage if allowed to get up in your face. So just like with the Assault Raiders, try and keep your distance between them and take them down as quickly as possible so you can focus on the bigger threats in the battlefield. Next up, let's talk about the medium threats on the battlefield, starting with the Scout Strider. This mech will be manned by a trooper, and though they can look pretty intimidating at first, especially when faced with a few of them, they have one huge weakness, and that is that the back of this mech is completely open and you can easily just shoot the trooper on the back, completely disabling and effectively destroying the vehicle, because once you've destroyed the operator, no other bots will try to run over and use it. Alternatively, and this advice is very crucial if playing solo, there is a few ways to fight them even from the front. If you have even a tiny bit of elevation, you should be able to shoot their head. Also, not that I've ever managed to do this, but I've been told that you can snipe them through the tiny little eye hole in the middle. But the easiest and my favourite way is just blast them with any kind of AoE explosive. Just 1 or 2 shots from a grenade launcher will kill them due to the splash damage that it deals. And by using this method, you can wipe out a whole squad of bots, not just the Scout Strider. By aiming a few grenades at it, you will blow up the Scout Strider and all of the little guys around it at the same time. This is definitely the easiest method for dealing with the swathes of little bots you will have to fight in every single one of the automaton missions. And doing this saves all of your big, beefy stratagems for the biggest enemies, which we will talk about in just a minute. The next medium threat enemy is the Beserker. These guys behave exactly like Brawlers. They are big, souped-up bots with chainsaws for hands, and they will just continually charge at you until they are dead. If you do get ganked by them, they can be very scary, but just know that their arms are their weak points, and if you blow both of their arms off, then they're pretty useless and won't be able to do all that much, allowing you all the time in the world to finish them off. And finally, for the medium enemies, we have Devastators. These come in 3 different forms: the standard Devastators, the heavy Devastator, and the rocket Devastator. The standard Devastators are just as brittle as the Berserker. Despite their appearance, they can be damaged by every damage type in the game. Just try and aim for their head and their eyes and they will go down far quicker than you expect them to. However, as for the heavy Devastator, they have a giant ballistic shield in front of them, and they're resistant to quite a few forms of damage. Again, I just blast them with 3 or 4 grenade launcher shots. However, any decent armor-piercing weapon will take these guys down pretty damn quick. The railgun is a personal favourite of the squad I usually play with, and this is also a very effective weapon for the next enemy we're about to talk about, the rocket Devastator. These guys are painful. They can shoot you from a flipping mile away with pretty good accuracy, and without any kind of armor or shields, just one of their rockets will end your existence. In my opinion, these are definitely the scariest enemies to deal with until you get to the really big high threats. So every time you see one of their rocket barrages whiz past you, find out immediately exactly where their rockets came from, track down the source and take them out immediately. These are such a high priority. They can very, very quickly ruin a mission. They don't have a particular weak spot, though. Again, you can shoot off the rocket pods, you can shoot off the arms, you can very quickly and easily disable them to give you a chance to finish them off without them causing too much more destruction. Now that you know how to handle all of the little and the medium threats, let me talk you through the 2 types of special bots before we take a look at the big guys. The first special type of bot is the Commissar. These guys have a small rapid-fire firearm in one hand and their sword in the other. And though they look pretty much identical and are just as weak as most of the small threats, what makes these guys special and a high priority target is they can shoot a flare gun which will pull down a bot drop. This works very similarly to bug breaches for the Terminid, and it will cool down a new wave of enemies. Therefore, whenever you notice a Commissar, you want to take them out immediately to stop them bot drops from happening. However, if they do, you will then encounter the second type of special enemy, the Dropship. The only way really to deal with a dropship is to have a very powerful weapon ready, and if you are quick enough and in the right place at the right time, you can blow up the dropship before it drops the enemies. However, don't try to make this happen, it's very, very, very unlikely. Failing that, you can potentially do what you see here and use something like the grenade launcher to blow up all the enemies whilst they're still in the dropship, completely nullifying that attack wave. Again, this is fairly unlikely to happen in most situations, so every time you see that new bot drop wave incoming, just keep an eye to the skies, see where the dropship is coming from, and prepare yourself for more enemies. Now let's finally get onto the big three and how to deal with them. The automatons actually have 4 big threats, but we're looking at the first 2 variations of the Hulk together, and that is the Hulk Bruiser and the Hulk Obliterator. Starting with the least scary of the 3 Hulks is the Hulk Bruiser. This uses 2 very powerful assault rifles and can still easily mow down an ill-prepared party. The weak point of all 3 variations of Hulk is the same, and I'll show you exactly what that is in the next clip. Whilst we're looking at these 2, as you can see here, their arms can be blown off, and unless you have a way to deal with one of them instantly, such as the orbital rail cannon, this is definitely the advised strategy. If you can't get behind them to tackle that weak point, shoot their arms off and you will nullify their offensive capabilities. Now, once you've dealt with the Hulk Bruiser, you may also encounter the Hulk Obliterator. This variation has rocket pods, and it is a super powered, very, very tanky rocket devastator on steroids. Personally, I feel this is the most terrifying Hulk variation, and if possible, always use something like the orbital laser, the rail cannon, or the spear weapon to take it down as quick as possible. Do not allow it time to reposition and fire on you, because you most likely will die. Now, before we move on to the final variation of the Hulk, as I said, the weak spot is on the back. So we can see here from the back of this Obliterator, you have the heat ventilation shafts. They are vulnerable to almost all forms of damage, and if you have someone distracting it from the front, you can just keep pummeling it in the back until it eventually blows up. However, as mentioned, the best thing to do is just call down a rail cannon and one-shot it. And now the third and final variation of the Hulk is the Hulk Scorcher. This is a melee variant with a devastatingly powerful flamethrower that is far more ranged than you would expect. At least with the Obliterator and the Bruiser, you can hide round corners. This thing will just track you down and will not stop hounding you until you or it is dead. So if you're on a mission where you know there are Hulks, perhaps save your biggest, most powerful options for the Scorcher, because if you don't have a way to take this thing down quickly, it can and will drive you out of any defensive position you have. And now for the biggest, most scary final automaton, we have got the Annihilator Tank. My god, was it hard for me to get footage of this thing. If you try and get close, you will die to either its giant cannon or its machine gun. Again, like the Hulk, the rear of the turret does have a weak spot. It does have a heat ventilation unit that you can target, but unless your positioning is perfect, it's very, very unlikely you'll be able to exploit this. These things have really earned their names as the Annihilator Tank. As you can see here, I can barely capture any footage. I am just dying again and again whilst trying to get close to these things. Just throw your biggest, most powerful stratagems at them and pray to God that they die before they even have chance to fire upon you. And with that, we have now looked at all 30 plus enemy types currently in Helldivers 2, along with exactly how to tackle them. Before I finish, do you have anything that I missed? Do you have any even better ways to deal with a few of these enemies that I haven't called out? Let us all know in the comments, because it would be great to learn together. And with that, please consider subscribing and giving the video a like if you've enjoyed it. And all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.